All right, let's go ahead and do it. Hi all again. Kathy Yami, we've got Taylor here. This is Taylor's show today. I want to give you a little bit of a very brief introduction, then just a little bit of housekeeping, and then we're gonna turn it over. Um, so Taylor, I guess you can go to the next slide. Today is going to be about two-way learning. And if you're like, what does that mean? We're going to define it. We're going to go through it. You're going to get, again, lots of good nuggets and everything. We've been sending out all the recordings and everything. And again, for those who are watching the recording, because we do have a lot of people that register that aren't always able to come. If you want any others, just any of the recordings that you missed, I've been trying to go back and get people who might have registered later and keep adding those to my list. And so we can get them out, but we can, Jenny, I guess I need to talk to you if you're going to do that, if you want me to do that. We can send all the recordings again at the end. And Jenny will also be sending a survey for you. This project is funded in part through Strong Start to Finish, who's working with Michigan. And so we have a survey about the individual sessions, but also a series as a whole, so that for next spring, especially, we can make this even better. Because like one of the things I want to know, and I just realized, Jenny, I don't know if they even have this on the question, but if there's some place that you guys can put this on the question that you want to answer, what I would love to know is which of these sessions was, or more than one, which of them could be plural, were the most valuable to you and you want us to do more on. Because like I'm debating about like we just barely got to scratch the surface with the very first one in making learning active and talking about building thinking classrooms, and there is a lot of things that we can do with that. And so I'm wondering, are people wanting for us to bring April back next spring when we do this and go deep into building thinking classrooms? There's all kinds of things we can do, or you can just also shoot me an email and say, yeah, I'd really like that. So either way, let us know what you want more or less of. That's what we're here. Thank you, Jenny. She's got the recordings on there. Okay, so let's see. Hang on one second. Taylor, do you have the question on the next one, on the next slide? Oh,
This one?
yeah. No, what I totally forgot. But I want to make sure you're fine. I'll just say it right here. So we do have on the next slide, we do have a reminder of the MyLeap grants. Please, I just was talking to an administrator this week and heard that evidently the information from 60 by 30 for these grants a lot of times has gone to the student success side of the house of the colleges and not always the academic side of the house. So you may have people that are aware of these grants, like a dean or a vice president, but they may not. And if they're not, please, we need to have, I'll put the link in the chat in just a minute. The moral of the story, there's a lot of money that the state of Michigan has to spend, and they want to spend it on you guys helping more students be successful. It's a matter of you filling out the application and asking. And this is just one developmental math. Maybe it's your English, whatever. It's just one piece of different things that you can get support on. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Sorry. Oh no. Is that is the Google Slides. There it goes. Okay. There's the 30 by 60.
Oh yeah, now I'll go to the
Yeah.
next one. All right. So, and I just got one little bit more and then I'm going to turn over to Taylor. So a reminder again, what we're trying to do with this whole series is help you have tons of tools. And if it's too many tools, don't be overwhelmed by it. Pick something. You don't have to do all of it. It's funny, I've always been a collector of ideas and activities, and if you saw the stack of crud that I had to clean out of my office when I left my college, it's unreal how many things I have. And I always said, I'm going to die before I'm going to be able to use all of this stuff in the classroom. That's okay. The idea is just if you find something here that was like, ooh, that's useful, we want you to try to implement it this fall. And so that, again, we can make these co-requisite courses more effective for you and students. And what we're trying to do is have flexibility built into them so we can address student needs, but still intentionality. And that is really going to be hit home today. We're going to be really talking about that. Oh, thank you, Jenny, for putting the link in there. Okay. And can you go to the next slide? Okay. So this is going to be our goal, and Taylor's going to go deep into what do we mean by it and everything. I just want to give you, just from my perspective, when I came up with this, what I was meaning with it, and what because I see it as an issue commonly when I'm working with schools. Basically, a lot of schools have what I would call one-way learning. And and again, I don't want to steal all of Taylor's stuff because she's going to go through this, but um, in essence, the idea is a lot of us, we totally dictate the time or the students totally dictate the time. Either like we've got everything mapped out and we're going to go through it, or the students, it's just a Q&A and they are dictating what we have to do. The thing I want you to think about, and I have to do this with every professional development that I do and every class that I teach. And sometimes I have a post-it note to remind me is where could I include more give and take? So that like, where are there places where that I can bring intentionality if I'm just letting them like, what questions do you have? Where can I bring more intentionality to it? And if I have like a whole mapped out thing, where can I bring some more flexibility to it and let the students, depending on what they need, dictate where we go next instead of me I have my plan of what we're going to do. So it's something you have to think about and you have to be really intentional about. You have to be mindful because it's very, very easy to get into one groove or another. It's just like, let the students tell us what we're going to do today, or I got my plan. And it's like the idea of doing like a give and take is more beneficial to everyone, but it does take thought and effort and mindfulness to make happen. All right. Taylor, it's up to you.
And then I think if you wouldn't mind kind of just with that goal in mind today.
Yes. So your goal is, so let's go back to the goal real quick. I apologize. This is my
You're
fault.
okay. That's okay.
I want you to, hopefully you can come up with a short list of at least one thing. I bet you'll have several things. How could you improve and get more two-way learning going in your class that has more give and take? So let's start with where you're at. If we go to the next slide, what I want you to do is put in the chat, just sketch out really briefly, what does a typical class period when you teach a co-req look like? And there is no right or wrong answer on this. Okay. So you're not being judged. It's just to, get us thinking, where are you at right now? So does that look like I come in, I ask if there's homework questions, I have a certain number of skills we do, some instruction, some group work. Okay. Others that are teaching this, or if you're thinking about teaching, maybe you're going to be new to co-requisites and you're like, well, this is what I'm thinking about doing for my, if I had an hour with students. Thanks, Mike. Yeah. And I know I am super guilty of this. I'm not saying it's always awful. It's just, because we're going to do it. There's going to be times where we're instructing. There's going to be times when they're just telling, saying, hey, I've got questions on this, but I guess can we incorporate both? Okay, Jody, typically I teach the first 30 minutes based on just-in-time needs, and then they're like, nice. So yeah. So I think and I also think having, again, some kind of template, that was one of the things we talked about the very first session. Each one of you needs to have your own. Like, so Jody sounds like she has kind of a template. Jan has her own, like, I'm going to try to do this for the first half of the period. I'm going to try to do this for at least, like 10 minutes each time or whatever. Like there's certain components so that it's again, that's getting in the intentionality. All right. I believe the next slide is yours, Taylor. Am I right?
Yep. You ready?
Yes, let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing that in the chat. I see some familiar faces, so I'm just going to briefly go through this, although I do see some new faces. So welcome and thank you for being here. My name is Taylor, and I have experience with co-requisite courses. I love teaching co-requisite students, and so I was so excited when I am currently having the opportunity to work with Kathy because she's the co-requisite queen. And I'm so glad to be here with all of you today and just have a really good conversation about two-way learning, just as Kathy's been discussing and thinking about what that means for us in our classrooms. But in terms of experience, I've had high school experience teaching, which I'll kind of talk about today, as well as community college instructor experiences. And in Texas, we started co-requisite courses in 2017, and I transitioned. Whoopsies, share this again. And I transitioned to the community college in 2018. So I've only ever known really co-requisite courses. And so I've had that opportunity to work with the co-requisite students, and now I've transitioned to my current role at the University of Southern California. But I still adjunct co-requisite courses and traditional level algebra courses as well. And then, like I said last week, I also fill other roles such as a mom. These are my two boys, and I love facilitating professional learning, and I love, talking to instructors and professors and working with them and kind of problem solving this new legislation that's going on in all these different states in terms of co-requisite courses. So
I want
really
to throw
quick,
one thing in, one
yeah.
real quick. I want to brag on Taylor for just a minute, and because I think she's going to be bringing it up later too. Taylor has also done facilitation work for the Dana Center at University of Texas, Austin, and some of you may be familiar with him. And I think Dana Center worked with the state of Michigan at some point too. So, and they have a really strong research base, but also facilitation base. So that's, I mean, to me, she's a gem to have. She has a great background.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. Yeah, they are. If you're unfamiliar with them, I will be talking about some of their design standards later. And I'll be happy to provide some additional links because they've got some resources available online as well that may be beneficial to you as you kind of navigate what you're going to do in your classroom and what that co-requisite looks like. So I'm going to talk about two-way learning and kind of some of the things that we've been discussing, but really quick, one more time, if you don't mind putting in the chat and just kind of thinking about, because we're going to talk a lot about culture and collaboration and design. And so kind of from an equitable standpoint, in your opinion, what does an equitable classroom look like? What does an effective classroom look like? Are they the same? Are they different ideas? And how can we achieve this equitable, effective classroom through the lens of our co-requisite courses? So that's a loaded question. And there's probably a lot of answers to that. But if you don't mind, maybe just putting an idea in the chat, a single idea, a few ideas, whatever kind of comes to mind. I'll give you a minute or so to just think about that and put something in the chat, please. And again, it's a loaded question as you're kind of thinking about this, even if you don't have, specific ideas right now, that's okay. Maybe just comment on, is equitable and effective the same thing? Are they different ideas? Is it possible to achieve this in co-requisite courses? I like that everyone engaged in discussion, having that understanding, feeling comfortable. That's huge for students for sure, especially in math, putting themselves out there. Safe, comfortable learning environment. I love that too. I'm going to give about 10 more seconds if anyone else has kind of some final thoughts before I jump into two-way learning. Thank you, guys. Feel free if you think of things kind of as we go through. There's no, you have to only put in the chat when we ask you to. Feel free to throw in ideas, unmute, join in on the discussion, even when it's not, the quote unquote chat time or share out time. But when Kathy and I were discussing this idea of two-way learning, I'm huge on graphics. I know they've kind of debunked learning styles, but I still say I'm a super visual person. So I love kind of thinking about this, and as Kathy explained and how I interpret two-way learning is we don't want it, and again, sometimes it will be one way and sometimes maybe we can't get around that via time constraints or whatever, the issue or the barrier may be. But the goal is to try to achieve that two-way learning most of the time. And so, one-way learning could be only doing lecture style teaching, or only having, what are y'all's questions today for the students, and having them just totally generate the ideas and leading where the, let's say, co-requisite time goes. And as I interpret two-way learning, I'm thinking it's more of teacher facilitated with students leading in the classroom, and the teachers or the instructors, professors, whatever words you want to use, are providing the information and students are generating those ideas. And as y'all said, students are talking, discussing, engaged. And so that's kind of the ideas that we're going to circulate our discussion today, and still, build off of what Kathy has said and what you guys have already kind of generated some ideas on your own, and how we can achieve that in our classroom. And so I kind of think, again, I like to create graphics on Canva. If you don't do Canva, you need to do it because it's so easy. But I think of what it means to be both flexible and intentional in our classroom, and what entails that, being flexible and intentionality. And I think about it kind of in three main ideas, and there are so many more ideas that we could, talk about and go into, but just for the purpose of this PD and even last week, I think of it almost as planning, learning, and assessment. In that kind of cycle. So, planning being that design stage, what you're going to do, learning being what actually happens in the classroom, and then assessment being anything from, the final exam to, do y'all get this? Thumbs up, thumbs down, really high stake, low stake, formative, summative assessments. If you were unable to attend the PD last week, we went a little more in depth to assessment. So I'm not going to talk about that today. Feel free to go back and look at that recording. I'm going to focus more on the planning and learning part today. And what I mean about planning, again, I'm talking about the design piece. And then when I talk about learning, I'm talking about both instruction and the community that's created to have that engagement and that student discussion that y'all talked about in the chat. And really that learning piece, for example, solely instructing would be one way, but creating that intentional community and, that that discourse in your classroom is really kind of getting back to that two-way learning, which takes intentional planning, and then eventual, assessment of what you're going to do. And so the first thing that I want to talk about the learning piece, and then we're going to go back to the design piece. So in terms of establishing an effective and equitable co-requisite community, kind of building off of that chat question, the biggest thing that I can say here, and I'm sure y'all can back me up, is this starts day one. I know that you have so much to get through with the syllabus, but from my own personal experiences and really from my own personal failures, let me just tell you, if you say, I used to think to myself, I'm going to get through the syllabus, I have so much that I need to cover, and then I'm going to start doing the welcoming activities or, whatever, this fun activity on day two. I hate to say it, it sounds a little dramatic. You've already lost them by that point, because you want to come in day one and set that expectation that you're going to be an active learner in this class. This is how we do things. It's going to be collaborative. You're going to talk to people. You're going to generate ideas. I'm not just sitting at the front the whole time talking to you, and you're not just going to sit in your chair the whole time and listen. I once heard in a professional development, and it's really honestly just stuck with me. I think I heard it 4 years ago. Those who are talking are those who are learning. So if you're the one talking the whole time, they're probably not, those ideas aren't going to stick. And I know it can be daunting to, do that day one. And I want to just say, especially from my experiences as a high school teacher, I did so many activities, but when it came to starting as a college instructor, I was so hesitant to do that because I had my own stigma of what a college instructor in a college classroom should look like. And it made me really uncomfortable to ask college students to get in groups and talk to each other because that's just not what I thought it was supposed to be. And so I urge you, kind of as we're going through these ideas and we're thinking about how we're going to establish this effective and equitable co-requisite community, to think about how you can, if it makes you uncomfortable, it's okay if it makes you uncomfortable, but try to push through that uncomfortableness, push through that kind of stigma that we have about what a college course is supposed to look like, and see how we can start implementing these ideas in our classroom. So really quickly, this is an example of a welcoming activity. We're not going to spend as much time as you might spend on an activity in your classroom. I just want to show you an example of what this could look like. And so we're going to take 5 minutes, and I'm going to just tell you, I'm going to put this link in the chat as well. You can use this QR code. Let me just say before you use the QR code and start going through it, I'm going to put you in groups of 2 to 3 people, depending on how many individuals. Actually, if Kathy doesn't mind doing that. And we're going to spend 5 minutes, and we're just going to try one of these activities. So the activities, I call them critical thinking activities. You can call them welcoming activities, but it has nothing to do with math. And just like was discussed in the Building Thinking Classrooms session, sometimes it's important, especially at the very beginning, to do activities that aren't math related, just to start students talking to one another and working together and thinking through. And so I just found these critical thinking activities. I didn't design them, but I will say, once again, before I put this link in the chat, these do have the keys on some of the slides, because I didn't want to give you 2 separate links, one with the keys, one without the keys. So maybe just choose one that's blank and you can kind of look through it, and I'll show you what this looks like as well. But for example, once we get into our groups, let's look at this really quickly. If you want to maybe just go to, I don't know, this slide 2, and think about, the instructions are on here. Connect 9 dots using only 4 lines and without lifting your pencil. So you might have to draw this on a notepad or something, and think about how you can do this as a group. Or one that's a little more conducive to group members would be number 3. So you think about, so Rebus puzzles use visuals that put different spin on words that are well known. So think about, like, given these, little clues that you're given, try to think about what the word is or the phrase for each of these puzzles. And so we're only giving you 5 minutes. You're not going to be able to do that much. But again, the idea here is to get students talking to one another. But the keys kind of start to present themselves in the later slides. So maybe just stick to 2 and 3 until I provide some sort of announcement that says, okay, you have 2 minutes left if you want to go back through the slides. And of course you have this link too, but the idea here is just to get you talking to one another, getting students talking to one another, and doing something that's not math related. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and join your breakout room. If you have questions, let us know. I'm going to give you just 5 minutes. It's not that much, but just have fun with it, and we can come back and talk in a second.
Hopefully everybody is getting a pop-up to put you in a room. Yes.
And they're all there too. Back in about 15 seconds.
And while we're waiting for other people to come back, will your next one also be 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Then I've already got it set up, and I can just open it and do.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I'm not going to explain all of these in detail, but really the purpose, again, is to get people talking to one another. These activities, maybe you can use them. I found at Global Digital online, it's an online resource, and yeah, maybe you can use them. They're just non-math kind of brain teasers. These are my high school students. There's also, if you have Pinterest, or you could probably look up, there's things called STEM challenges. So you don't need any, prerequisite knowledge. It's just, I gave them a canister of Pringles and said, you need to make this into a circle. And so anyways, it literally took them the entire class period, but they had fun and they really enjoyed it. So just generally, some of the activities that you do in terms of welcoming, they can be, math related, but it's probably better at first if they're not, to try to start that collaborative classroom and that collaborative community. So kind of as we transition to that collaborative, those collaboration ideas, just in general, if you don't mind putting in the chat, you can answer one of, or all of these. I'm kind of guilty of putting several questions and asking you to answer a lot. So what does a collaborative classroom look like? What does collaboration have to do with learning? Is it necessary or kind of optional? And then how can this be achieved specifically for our co-requisite students? And within our co-requisite courses, does it look different than our traditional courses? Does it look the same? So what are kind of some initial ideas there as we start to think about these ideas? I'm going to give you about 1 to 2 minutes to put those in the chat. Yeah, I like that comment because sometimes when we implement activities or whatever it may be in our classroom and we hear people talking, we think that talking equals collaboration, and that's not necessarily true. As Mike has said, all participating, we're making sure that all of our students are collaborating and communicating with one another. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. Kushum, thank you for that. Yeah, discussing the topic. Anytime you can get students to talk about math, it's a win. Yeah, student-led, letting us step back. Thank you, guys. If you have additional chats, feel free to put them in. I'm going to go ahead and move on, though. So just generally, collaborative communities within our co-requisite students, for our co-requisite students, here's some general ideas that research has said. Students need to understand why we're asking them to collaborate. Again, you may have hesitations in terms of students not wanting to do it. And if they're able to understand why they're being asked to do this, it might be a little smoother transition. They need support. Collaboration is a skill that some people don't have. It needs to be ongoing. It's not like you ask the students to collaborate and do an activity once a month. It needs to be a practice that's implemented frequently. And it should be, again, as I discussed earlier, it should be introduced early and scaffolded, and initial activities don't necessarily have to be math related. So it's, again, tell these students how important it is to discuss the ideas that leads to deeper learning, and that when you're part of group work, you're creating a support system within this classroom, and they can help you with areas of confusion or even kind of connect, the muddiest point that you had in the lesson. And then again, just setting that early expectation and doing it often are very important in terms of creating those collaborative communities. Think, Pair, Share. The building thinking classrooms. Professional development went into this a little bit, so I'm not going to go deep into this, but just generally, again, when to do pairs or small groups, and kind of some strategies to think about when you're doing group work. Outcomes should always be specified, your expectations, and they should be clear, and allowing students to sit in group throughout the class. As they mentioned previously, don't do groups larger than 4, and really 4 is almost too big. A voice usually gets lost with 4. I like to do 2 to 3. And again, that was discussed in the first PD. Randomly assign, I think it was her name was Rachel, maybe, showed you how to do a little thing online. You can also have cards and let students randomly choose cards. But I mean, your students know if they were put in ability-based groups, they know if they're, part of the quote unquote smart group or the quote unquote dumb group. And so, by randomly assigning groups, you may just have groups that finish sooner than other groups. So make sure that when that happens, you have some sort of activity and not just busy work for them to do, or you have a plan in place for what they can do with the extra time. And again, just setting those outcomes, making those accountabilities aware for students. And then if it seems like it's going badly, you can always go back to whole class group, whole group discussion, and then kind of go back to the pairs. Whole group discussions are useful, particularly at the beginning, or maybe when you have a lot of groups stumbling, and then just again, kind of maybe even at the end of class to kind of conclude. I will just tell you, again, we're just thinking of getting out of our comfort zone here. It's possible that this is going to be uncomfortable. It's possible that some times it's not going to go very well. We've all been there, right? Like we have activities and you're like, oh my gosh, that went terribly. But just kind of, have some grace for yourself, have like you would have grace for your students. You're learning, they're learning, and it's kind of a work in progress. There may be some days that are better than others, but as long as you're kind of moving forward and students are talking, then what can go that bad. So let's think about this in terms of that creating that collaborative culture, different ways we can get students to talk to each other. Let's just have a really quick breakout session, and then we're going to go a little bit more into the design aspect of your course. So, and we can put these in the chat as well, but in breakout session, let's do 5 minutes. What's going well with your learning culture? What aspects of effective learning culture would you like to work on? Even, thinking of what challenges have you had? Why, if you think, why is it not going well? Maybe it's some students aren't talking. I literally can't get them to talk, or some students are doing this or that. And then how do you define well? I define it went well because all of my students are talking, and or it went well because, I don't know, whatever you define that. Let's think about that. Let's talk to each other. And if you don't mind, within your groups, identify one person to just come back with an idea that's going well and what you'd like to work on. And if you can identify your person to either put in the chat or to share out, then choose the person whose birthday is coming up the closest, who is turning blank age next. So I'm going to pause for a second, ask if anyone has questions. We'll put these questions in the chat. If you don't have any questions, we will send you to your breakout rooms for 5 minutes. Oh, like what she said in the chat. Put someone on the spot and make you uncomfortable, as we've been talking about. Would anyone be willing to share your designated person? And if you didn't designate a person, then the bravest person in your group to talk about what was discussed, some of the things that are going well, some of the things that you'd like to work on. Feel free to unmute if you're feeling brave. We would love to hear from you.
I don't know that I'm the bravest, but I volunteered, so I guess I'm the stupidest. But anyway,
that's what I was gonna say.
Well, I thought it was very cool that Jody initiated since last week, having her students do the vertical learning on the boards. So good on her for that. But yeah, I think we talked more about what we could work on, which is really teaching students how to communicate with each other, because they are so isolated now, and they will like text each other instead of just talking to each other. So setting up a classroom that is more conducive and encouraging communication is key. Verbal communication. That's something we both recognize that we really need to work on. I am lucky that I'm in a school that uses Carnegie Math Pathways with a grant that already pushes a lot of growth mindset and productive persistence and collaboration and everything. So I feel like that is going pretty well for us. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what we talked about.
Thank you. No, and it's really hard to, it's so fulfilling when you have that collaborative community and you finally get to where students are talking to each other. But it makes me so uncomfortable to and I really have to be intentional about it and put it out there and just say, this is what we're going to do. And I just always think I'm going to have pushback, but I really don't. But it's just, getting to that point and making sure that expectations are clear, but I'm glad it's going well. Other group, do y'all have someone who's the bravest? We'll call you the bravest.
All right, well, that was me, but I didn't know I was going to get labeled the bravest. And I don't know that we answered the first one as far as now that I reread the question, but what we answered was we felt that when the work that we did, the course structure did seem to work for the students who did the student thing. So how we scaffold the co-requisite class with the requisite, I'll call it, class, the process did seem to work. That was one of the things I took away from our other session. I think it was session 2, that for not having any idea what we were going to do or how to do it, we were pretty successful in how we structured our co-requisite class. So we kind of lucked into it, which was good. And then what to work on is getting more students engaged. And so, for our students that will engage, it typically ends up to be a successful outcome. It doesn't guarantee it, but it does tend to improve their chances. And then, so that would just go along with getting more participation from them.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, and it's just something that we're constantly thinking about. I was just talking to Kathy during the break and thinking, how do you get faculty members to engage during, PD? And it's something that y'all are thinking of too. And in terms of, what's going on in your classroom, how do I get these students to be engaged? How do I know that, they're locked in to this? Because sometimes even someone can be looking at you and they're not necessarily engaged in the content. So sounds like y'all had a really good discussion, and hopefully some of the things that I'm about to show you can help with that engagement. Just really quick, and then we're going to talk about designing co-requisite. And I'm glad that Mike, some of the things that Kathy talked about in session 2 has been helpful, and so hopefully I can build on some of those ideas. But in terms of implementing activities, really activities establish culture. It's part of that two-way learning that we've been talking about. It's instructor facilitated yet led by the students starting at day 1. But just some things to kind of think about as you think about what activity am I going to implement in my class, and how do I implement this? Make sure that the students have the necessary knowledge. Some things they don't need, like those critical thinking activities, we don't have to think about prereq knowledge. We can just do it. Whereas maybe don't introduce a quadratic equation if you've only talked about linear, because in that sense, some activities can make students, question themselves and, think, okay, why don't I know this? And so it's kind of thinking about that line between making sure that they have that necessary knowledge, but also making, it challenging enough for students, and making sure that in groups of 3, it's not going to take them 2 minutes to complete this. It's going to be challenging. And then, as we've kind of already discussed, but making sure that whatever the activity is, that it has clear expectations, the students understand their roles. You say, you're going to have 15 minutes to work on this, whatever those expectations are, make sure they're clear, and make sure that they're clear outcomes. They're realistic. You know, if you haven't talked about quadratic equations, you shouldn't expect a student to know how to factor that yet. And making sure that it's challenging enough for students, and they're not going to finish, like I said, in 2 minutes, or kind of some of the things that I think about when implementing activities. And I'm just going to show you a few activities. I'm going to go through this very briefly. You know, you've seen and implemented activities in your classroom, but just some additional things to think about. And I try to do this, you know, just different ideas that you could implement asynchronously, synchronously, online, in person, in different courses. But just some things, you know, include discussion boards, activities that, you know, hopefully promote that mathematical discourse and communication that we're looking for. Activities that ask students to explain. If you can explain something, I've always said, then you know it. If, you know, I can't explain science to people because I don't probably know it very well. But if you can explain something, you know, a student knows. Desmos, I'll just give Kathy a shout out. She may have to throw some things in the chat now that I have. Kathy does so much with Desmos. She's got someone on her team that knows Desmos in and out, and so she may have some resources to share there. But they have all sorts of activities already created for you, right? Like our biggest hurdle as educators is time constraints. And so if something already exists, just don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. So other activities, but just generally things that get students talking to each other out of their seat. And it also doesn't have to be math related. It could be social emotional support. It could just be, you know, like those critical thinking activities. But I just want to go through a few that I've done previously. I've done this in my online course. I asked them to create and add to a Google slide deck, put their name, a picture, a photo of how they learn, concerns, goals, interpreting a quote. So this is just an example of a welcoming activity that you can do asynchronously to help students get to know one another. I love this welcome activity. You can find, like I said, I'm going to go through these quickly, so I apologize for that. But just, again, giving you ideas. I love this coordinate grid. I've seen this done. I used to do this in my class pretty much all the time. You don't have to just do it as a welcoming activity. But you can just put a word on the x-axis and a word on the y-axis. So maybe the word is math, and maybe this word is Netflix. I don't know. And they have to kind of rate themselves as if, you know, I really like math, but I don't like Netflix. Or I really like math and I really like Netflix. I don't like either. Or I really don't like math, but I really like Netflix. So it kind of helps them remember how a coordinate grid works, and you can be as creative with it as you want to be. This is a activity that I made for credit cards. I made a lot of additional slides, but here's just 4 of the cards. And any time that you can have cards, like I would print this out and cut them and just have something that the students can hold at least for in-person courses, I think is really beneficial. Students like to have those manipulatives, something that they can hold, you know, whatever that I was just asking them, which credit card would you choose? Why? You know, make the justifications, which are bad credit cards. Why wouldn't you choose that? So anyways, just allowing them to have that credit card, quote unquote, that they could hold, I think is really important. It does take some work on your end, but it's valuable. And once you do it, if they take care of it, you can just use it each year. As Kathy said, you will get a big, you know, pile of stuff on your desk, but you can use those activities. I really like finding images online and asking students which one doesn't belong. I like these because there are a lot of right answers. They just have to justify. Again, it's kind of getting that mathematical discourse. So maybe they say this one doesn't belong because it's an upward facing parabola. Or maybe another student says something different. This one doesn't belong because the roots aren't real. Whatever, you know, they're having to talk about that and justify. And maybe you can say, well, once one's taken, someone else has to justify why another one doesn't belong. And you can do this for any topic. Again, just kind of giving you ideas. Here's an example of Desmos. I'm going to go through this one. Just keep going. Again, There are things online. Don't reinvent the wheel. This is, you can cut this out. You can have a Google slide of this where they just dragged the information, and I had them work asynchronously on this in some of my online courses, and then another student had to come back in and check their work. So again, if you're kind of trying to figure out like, how do I get students to talk to each other online? That's a way that they can do that. You can always do stations, get them out of their seat, get them up around the room. And then lastly, I like this one. This is really easy to do. You can do this on vertical surfaces. I used to do this in my class, and I would put equations. Let's say we're working on quadratic equations, and I would just make a list of things that I wanted them to do. And depending on the amount of groups that you have, really depends on how many, the length of the list of things that you do. But I would say, okay, this group find the x-intercept, and then I would give them like 3 minutes to do that, or the x-intercepts. And then now let's shuffle. So go to the board to your right. So now you're looking at, a previous group's work. Okay, did they do the x-intercepts right? Yes. Okay. Now when you're on your new board, find the y-intercept, and you're just continuously rotating. And so they're having to look at new problems, making sure that the groups before them did the work correctly, and then, finding whatever it is that we were doing in that round. And I enjoy that. And then the last thing I'll say is I also do activities that aren't math related. I do mental health check-ins a lot. This is really, really good. I've found for asynchronous courses, especially when you're trying to get to know your students. They just, for some reason, are so hesitant to reach out to you. I don't want to bother you. You're not bothering me. Like, this is my job. But I found that if you implement these mental health check-ins, and I'll throw this in the chat too. I would, or I'll just, let's do 1 second. Maybe. Oh, I thought I had a chat. I'll dump this in the chat in a little bit. I'll find it during your next breakout. But I would ask, what's going well today? Do you need anything from me? Just asking them, kind of probing them. And a lot of the times they would say something like, my grandma just died, and whatever is going on. And I would say, oh my gosh, do you need an extension on this? And I would have never known what's going on in their lives if not for these check-ins. And so this is just another idea that you can kind of think about as you're, designing and implementing activities in your class. That was a lot of information, but I'm trying to get to all the fun things that I have planned today. And again, as I'm trying to model, I want y'all to be talking more than I'm talking. So I'm going to pause for a second. That was a lot of information. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll look in just a second. But kind of thinking of that cycle that we looked at the beginning. So that was kind of the learning piece. There's so much more that you could go through with the learning piece and two-way learning in that regard. But let's think and shift back a little bit to the planning and the designing of your co-requisite courses. I'm going to talk about design standards. I'm going to talk about what it might look like with 2 instructors, 1 instructor. We're going to cover a lot of things, but I'm hoping, again, that you're going to have time to talk and share ideas as well. So first thing, I do have this link. Let me send this in the chat. So Kathy mentioned earlier, I have facilitated professional development for the UT Austin Dana Center, and they do a lot with co-requisite courses. And so I want to talk about design standards really quick. I'm going to talk about designing instruction first, and then we're going to talk about like actually designing co-requisite. What does this look like? Maybe what is day-to-day for co-requisite, your co-requisite course? How should I, what should I do? How should I do it? So let's talk about curricular standards first, and I'll just mention these briefly. I know you probably don't have the time to look at every single lesson that you've developed and look and see if they've met these standards, or even look at these standards and design a new lesson that embeds all of these standards. That's not realistic. That's not what I'm asking you to do. But I do use these standards in UDL, which I'll talk about in just a second, as kind of a check for myself if I've already got existing lessons to make sure that they're kind of meeting the needs of all of my learners. And I like these standards. I like the Dana Center standards because they're very centered around equity and student-centered, supporting students, communication, which we've talked about. And they kind of break down those standards. And I just go through lessons sometimes and I'm like, okay, does it meet student-centered? Yes. Okay. Does it meet communication? No. How could I modify this lesson? And usually they're very small modifications to make sure that, we're incorporating that in terms of your design standards. So I'm not going to, again, go through these super in depth, but there's the link, and the Dana Center has a lot of resources online. I'm happy to share any links with you. If you need them, just let me know. The second thing that I want to talk about in terms of designing your lessons is universal design for learning. This is a little grainy. I apologize. I just put the link in the chat though, and you should see this image pretty quickly as soon as you click on the link if you want to look at that. But universal design for learning, also referred to as UDL, is essentially a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people. And it's based on all this research into how, people learn, how individuals learn. And it's the mission of CAST. They're the people that developed UDL to make education more inclusive and effective, essentially. And it's done through three main parts: engagement, representation, action, and expression. And again, I'm not going to, you can do this on your own if you're really interested and look at, the breakdown of each of these. But again, I'll go through lessons and I'll say, okay, does it meet A, B, and C for engagement? Yes, no. Okay, how could I perhaps modify this lesson if so? Because again, these are just design standards to kind of check yourself to make sure that you're meeting the needs for all of the learners that are in your classroom. So kind of how I think of UDL is that it's providing structures and place for all students, and students that I would say, for the margins. So thinking of, the architecture of a building, if someone were to put in a ramp, it doesn't necessarily, I don't need a ramp. I can get up and using stairs to go into the entrance of a building. However, I like using ramps sometimes because it's, it's just a little easier. Or if I'm carrying something heavy, the ramp is nice. But of course, some people need the ramps to be able to actually get into the building. And the point that I'm trying to make here is the idea for this curriculum is it helps some people that definitely need it. They need the ramp, but it also is nice for everyone. It's not like a ramp hurts anyone. Thinking of this maybe through the lens of education, for example, putting, closed captioning, subtitles on your videos helps people who have, auditory issues, but also sometimes I like looking at subtitles because I've got kids and I just would rather read what's going on than listen. And so again, it's helping everyone when you're kind of looking at these UDL standards. And in terms of learning, this framework is based on 3 brain networks: the why, what, and how. And so just kind of thinking of that, again, I'm just going to talk about UDL for like 1 more minute and then I'll be done with this and we can move on. But lastly, just UDL, again, just kind of thinks of those infrastructure concepts. So the develop of buildings, structures, and other places. And it's good for everyone. And it, like the ramp, it's good for everyone. Maybe some people need it, but some people like it. This framework supports and challenges students. And so a lot of the times I really do, like when I'm creating assessments and creating learning goals for a lesson, I'll use this to design. And a lot of the times UDL kind of makes me think of multiple streams, the idea of multiple streams, making sure that maybe this lesson has the opportunity for people to learn in different ways, as well as multiple ways that they can show their mastery. And we talked a little bit about that last week, but just maybe different assessments for people. I'm not just going to do high stakes assessments. Maybe I'm going to do high stakes assessments and projects, so people can display their knowledge using multiple streams. So just really quickly, I'd like for you to do a reflection. You don't necessarily have to do the chat, but if you want to, feel free to unmute or chat your thoughts. But UDL provides multiple streams of engagement, representation, action, and expression. Those are, again, kind of those three main ideas. So I want you to think about an assignment or a learning outcome where your students have routinely had challenges. And again, maybe just for the purpose of reflection, and feel free to put in the chat or unmute if you want to, but how could you redesign that assignment or outcome by adding another stream? I'm going to give you about a minute to think about that. About 30 more seconds, and then I'm going to move on. And you may not have one right now, but maybe even just write this question down in your notes for you to revisit later when you're thinking of designing activities or implementing some sort of instruction or assessment. Okay. I'm going to shift a little bit. I want to see a chat. Yeah, closed captioning on videos. And honestly, from my experience, a lot of the time there are very easy, especially in terms of accessibility checkers and what have you, that will do a lot of things for you. You just kind of have to be cognizant. Like, I know I had to select some sort of setting when I created YouTube videos to make sure that closed captioning was an option, and then it did it for me. So yeah, awesome. So I'm going to shift a little bit. Again, we're thinking of designing co-requisites. And so some of the things that I am talking about are, you're going to be limited, or you may need to bring it up as a department that you can't make as a decision individually. So in terms of designing your co-requisites, so we've talked about this a little bit. Institutions do it differently. So I'm going to kind of generally overview a lot of these. So you can have a single instructor who is the instructor of the co-requisite course and the traditional level course. This is the most preferred method, in my opinion. Kathy may have something different to add. And Kathy, if I'm saying anything, and you have knowledge of something different, feel free to chime in. But at least from my perspective and my experiences, single instructors are the best to have in both the co-requisite and the traditional level course. But you can also have multiple instructors, one who does the Co-Req, one who does the traditional. I've seen this a lot with night classes, but I mean, anyways, doesn't really matter. Regardless of that, if the only thing I want to say here is if you have multiple instructors, they don't need to be standalone courses. It's not like you never see that instructor and they just do whatever they do and you do whatever you do in the traditional level course. It should be, I think, again, Kathy's done this before, it should be integrated. You should be in constant communication with the other instructor. We did this, the students were struggling with this, you know, whatever. It's not like this instructor should have exactly what they're going to do at the beginning of the semester. Again, just thinking of that flexibility and intentionality. You were working with your set of students, and the co-requisite should be a supplement to the traditional level course. And I mean that in that, you know, if the traditional level course instructor should be informing the co-requisite instructor, and the co-requisite instructor should be informing the traditional level course, like, here's what's going on with the students. And again, it should just be that collaborative, hopefully, among the instructors. In terms of co-requisite courses, Kathy's talked about this before. You could have only co-requisite students in there, or you could have commingled. So I've had both, and here are the pros and cons. When I have only co-requisite students, I love this because I'm able to blur the lines between my traditional course and my co-requisite course. What I mean by that is, I know that I have, let's say, an hour for my co-requisite course. And so I think of, and I plan for an hour of activities, but I don't have to wait until the beginning or the end of the course to do that. What I'll do is I'll instruct a little bit, and then we'll do an activity for, 15, 20 minutes, and then instruct, activity, instruct. And so I'll kind of embed that. So it's not like, I love this because it's like, a lot of the time people are wondering, how am I going to implement all of these activities given the time constraints? And it's like, you can use the Co-Req time kind of to your advantage, and to use that supplemental time, like within your traditional time. You can't do that if it's commingled, because, like you only have an hour, let's say, in 20 minutes for these group of students, and then a different group of students for the same group, just a subset of those students stay for the co-requisite class. And so they really do have to kind of be more standalone. But those are, again, just departmental considerations. And a lot of the time those decisions are made just based off of enrollment. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Kathy. I think commingled are actually better for co-requisite students, but in terms of flexibility, you have a little less.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, definitely there's preferences, there's pros and cons to both, just like you said. And it's interesting to me the difference between math and English, because there's a lot of times where math faculty will like it a certain way, but English faculty like it a different way, which just shows, the differences in our content. But what I find is interesting is most of the time that decision in terms of it's commingled or cohorted comes down to logistics. So much of it, it's like what we would prefer to do, but then there's also like, how many students do we have? How many sections? What capacity do we have? Staffing, all kinds of stuff like that. So it's interesting how it plays out. It does make me feel good, though, that in some report that came out last year about all the state of Texas and all the massive amount of co-requisite implementation, because Taylor, you teach in Texas, correct? Or you did teach in Texas?
Yes.
So House Bill 2223 required co-requisites on scale for all the Texas colleges. And there was a statewide study done of all of it. And one of the things they found was there was no magic combination or preferred way, that pretty much any of these different techniques we can use in terms of how we organize, how many credit hours, who teaches them, they can work depending on implementation. There's just some that I feel like are easier. And I agree with what Taylor said. It's easier with one instructor. It's easier with cohorted. Doesn't mean you can't make it work the other way.
Thank you, Kathy. Also, it's raining at my house. So if I am lagging at all, just let me know and I'll repeat something as needed. And then just the last thing you need to consider, again, these are departmental decisions. Possibly you might have a departmental final that you need to be thinking about for, we've been talking about assessment a lot to kind of consider. And then you also may have a course syllabus, which I'm going to talk about syllabus in just a second. But I know at one institution that I worked for, I had free range. I had some things that I had to put in there, but I had a lot of free range. And then another one was like, here's the highlighted section, put your name in here, put your office hours, whatever. And there was really no leeway. So what I'm about to say may be completely pointless to you, but this is super grainy. I'm so sorry. I'll find a link and I'll send it to you. But I just took this from Rowan State Community College. This is online. This is an example of kind of just someone designing a co-requisite course with their traditional level. They have, and I'll just explain it to you since it's hard to read. They have co-requisite in the in this leftmost column, and then they had their traditional course in the rightmost. So they're just making sure that there's that alignment between the two. And I think this would be especially useful if there's two different instructors. If you're a single instructor too, like this could be really helpful in, thinking of prerequisite knowledge or whatever for some of these topics. But this is just an example that I've really liked. Okay, talking about syllabus, and then I promise I'm about to stop talking and y'all can go in your breakout rooms. But I did a kind of an exercise once where I was asked to analyze my syllabus, and I think it's very beneficial. So I know, just, you probably don't have a syllabus sitting right in front of you, but some things to think about. And again, you may not have any leeway whatsoever with your syllabus, so I'm sorry if the next 2 minutes are pointless to you. Make sure that expectations are clear. Not to say that, I have these due dates and they can't change, not to say that you can't be in, again, that flexibility with students. Things happen, things come up, but just making sure that the expectations are clear from the beginning, those outcomes are clear. Make sure that it's welcoming. I mean, I know it's a contract, but still, this is one of the first things that students see, and some of their first interactions with you. And a lot of these students' experiences with math have been negative. And so we're not handing out A's. Once again, we're keeping the rigor, but we want students to feel welcomed. We want them to feel safe. And I asked myself, does it serve all students? So an example that I'll use here is for our online classes for the institution that I work for. They asked students to come in person. Like, this was our departmental decision. How do we get past the online testing? And the decision that was made was students have to come in person. Okay. Well, the testing centers are only open from 8 to 5. That is not serving all students, especially in a community college. A lot of our students work, they have children, whatever the situation may be. And so the way that we kind of mitigated that was, as a department, we took one single day, like everybody signed up, and like we tried to align our assessments. And I knew that on week 4, I'd have to go to this campus from like 6 to 8 p.m. and I would proctor exams. And yeah, it's a little, it's like, oh, this is on my weeknight, but at least if you're asking a student to do something, you need to make sure that you're allowing them the opportunities to be successful, and it's serving all of your students. I would also ask you, just kind of when you're analyzing your syllabus, does it penalize single mistakes? So I know a lot of people do this, but I'll just mention it. A lot of instructors will drop the lowest test grade and replace it with the final. So getting sick or failing one exam doesn't just totally kill a student's grade, because again, stuff happens, life happens. And I've just kind of added this from what I've learned from Kathy: covers only necessary and relevant material. Again, your hands might be tied here. I'm not sure departmentally what that looks like for you, but it's just something to consider when you're looking at your syllabus. So general kind of overview of ideas, day-to-day in your co-requisite course. And I am telling you this from failed experiences. It should not be a homework hour. Students don't do well with that. It's not like, okay, we have this hour, just do whatever you need to work on, but you need to stay the whole time. That doesn't work for anyone. And it's really boring for you, let me just say. Unstructured Q&A, again, that just kind of goes back to what Kathy was saying, like that one-way learning. I do like to, I will say, have some time for students at the end. I think that's super beneficial. And I think it's kind of personalized. Like, here's some activities, here's some structured this, structured that. And then having that unstructured time at the end. But what she's talking about is the entire time, just asking students each time, okay, well, what questions do you have? Because a lot of the times they don't really know where to start. And it definitely shouldn't be an extended lecture time. I had colleagues that did this. They would hold students hostages for like 2.5 hours of teaching algebra. That I love math, and that just seems terrible. So make sure that, you're not using the time. It's like, oh, I really needed to cover this material. Treat it like a traditional level class. If you can't get it done in an hour and 20 minutes, then it needs to wait until next time. Some of the things that it could be that we've discussed: supplemental activities, building on prerequisite knowledge, group work, the board problems that we talked about in the Building Thinking Classroom session, bridge problems that Kathy's discussed. There's a lot of things that the co-requisite could be, a lot of exciting things that it could be, and really just kind of looking at this extra hour as an opportunity to serve your students and to enhance their learning experience is kind of how I've tried to approach this idea. So I think, yeah, we have time. So this is probably our last breakout session. Kathy, are you able to make them, or did you? I can make them as well. Okay. So let's just think. Co-requisite time. This is the biggest question that I get. What do I do with this extra time? What have you found to be a beneficial use of your co-requisite time? Again, like we can talk a lot about what it can't be, but what has worked? What's been a good use of the time? So go ahead and join your class, join your rooms, or hang back and ask questions and find someone to share out. I think we'll have time. You'll have about 5 minutes. Welcome back. I'm trying to decide if we have enough time to share because I'm trying to be very cognizant of your time. Could one person share like one really quick thing with the group? That would be awesome because I love to hear from you guys. If you were designated your person.
I'll just go really quick a second. One of the things that I found, so this is our first year teaching co-requisites at the community college that I'm at. And honestly, one of the things that I found to be beneficial during my co-requisite time is doing total non-math activities. So for example, we spent 20 minutes of one of the class periods talking about what's a SMART goal and how do you write SMART goals. And it literally was, hey, I want to buy my first car. And so I was like, okay, that's a great goal. How do we set you up to buy your first car? But learning how to do non-SMART, like non-math SMART goals indirectly helped them build their confidence. And so a lot of times I just felt like with these co-requisite kids, these kids just didn't know how to study, or they didn't know how to write a goal, or they didn't know how do I accomplish homework? Like, how do you set up a environment where you can accomplish your homework? Like, what does that look like? And prioritizing your time. And so some of the best of my discussions in my co-requisites classes were non-math discussions.
I love that. And again, those soft skills, I think is so beneficial for co-requisite students. There's more I want to say, but I'm going to ask, does the other group have a rep that would like to talk? We've got like 30 seconds left, probably. If not, it's
kind of on the lines of where I just mentioned, kind of on the lines of what Jody said. I'm giving my students opportunities to reflect on their learning and then sharing that with me, and then helping them kind of identify, like, because sometimes they don't even know that they don't know or what it is that they don't know. So having opportunities from them to do that. And then also the introduction of topics. So if you have a co-req prior to that particular class, introducing them to and having them have opportunities to work through those kind of prereq things, and or using their calculator, for example, and taking the opportunity to help them like do things like that.
awesome. I love that. Thank you guys. Thank you for talking to one another. Thank you for your engagement today. Really appreciate it. Speaking of reflection, although we're like right at time, if you want to take some time to reflect, here's kind of some guided reflection for you. I'm sure Kathy's gonna send out, I'll let her talk maybe for like, it's 12:30, but if you want this, here it is. She's gonna send out all the slides. Go ahead, Kathy. Thank you all for listening to me today. Y'all are awesome. Go ahead.
Yeah, we'll definitely be sending out recording and slides like we always do, and probably doing like a whole send out everything again just in case. And Jenny Schenker from MCCA will be sending out a survey, but again, it's somewhere on that survey, even if it doesn't ask, like if there's something specific that you want more or less of, please say that, because this is for you. These 4 sessions were designed with faculty, with requests in mind. We want to do the same thing next spring. What do you want more or less of? And then we'll do it. So thank you so much for coming, everyone.